Hi, I'm Connor Rachel, and the name of my project is Systematic Racism and Oppression in America. American system is inherently corrupt to the core to work against the black community. The novel I chose is Between the World and Me by Ta-Nehisi Coates. I chose to discuss the theme of oppression because Coates analyzes so well how the African American community is systematically oppressed by the country in the novel. To help you better understand the definition of systematic racism and oppression, here is a short video.
You might think racism in the US is really a case of a few bad apples. A racist cop here, a so called Karen there, a leader of a white supremacist group. You know, people who deliberately hate. But we can't blame racism in America on just a few bad apples. Think of our nation's problem as more like an apple pie, with the racial injustice baked right into every aspect of our society. Meet Ebony and Emily, two American babies, one black, one white, born at the same time, same place, but Ebony will not get an equal slice of the pie, and that starts from birth. Because of her race, Ebony is 3 times more likely than Emily to die in the hospital as a newborn if her doctor is white. And once Ebony and Emily go to school, while both girls occasionally misbehave, studies show they won't face the same punishment. Ebony is 7 times more likely than Emily to be suspended, and 4 times more likely to be arrested on campus. When the 2 girls grow up and apply for jobs, odds are fewer employers will call Ebony back because she has a black-sounding name. And even though Emily and Ebony will get the same college degree, once Ebony is hired statistically as a black person, she'll make an average of 25% less than Emily. So why didn't Ebony get an equal slice of that apple pie? It's because systemic racism is built into our country's DNA.
This theme is reinstated throughout the novel, but reaches a climax when his friend Prince Jones is murdered by the police on his way home to his fiancée on claims that he was trying to run the cop over. The cop in question suffered no punishment for this. Coates, before this moment, did not yet realize the systematic oppression that takes place to the African American community in America, even though he witnessed it throughout his childhood. But as Jones's funeral, 5 minutes into the 2nd chapter, Coates says, "I heard several people ask for forgiveness for the officer who shot Prince Jones down." Coates realizes that it wasn't the officer that killed Jones at all, but the country that failed him. He says, 5 minutes and 30 seconds into the 2nd chapter, Jones wasn't killed by the officer, but by his country. After Coates says this, for the first time at the beginning of chapter 2, he will come back to Prince Jones's death and the topic of systematic oppression throughout the rest of the novel. He says 6 minutes and 45 seconds into the 2nd chapter, the problem with America isn't that they are pigs, but that America is ruled by majoritarian pigs. This makes me think of a term we've all heard before, which is, don't hate the player, hate the game. It's hard not to hate both the player, the police officer, and the game, the systematic government and criminal justice system in a situation like Prince Jones's, but it is all too often that the game is completely forgotten altogether. I think the hardest hitting quote for me is when 43 minutes and 20 seconds into the 2nd chapter, Coates says, "In America, it is tradition to destroy the black body. It is heritage." It is Coates' belief that African Americans are born with the birthright of being oppressed by white people who are born with the birthright of doing the oppressing, in alliance with the systematic oppression. We are both born with these rights that have been given to us by birth by the country. Just showing how deep these roots go into the oppression of African Americans. The roots go back to the beginning of America altogether. But it gets even worse for black women. Coates says 1 hour and 32 minutes and 30 seconds into the 1st chapter that women's bodies are set out for pillage more than he could ever know. He goes on to say that as a black woman, the system isn't only against you, but they live in a constant fear of their bodies being destroyed by not only police, but by their own brothers.